Hi everyone, today's video will be on conclusions. I will discuss a little bit about what a conclusion is, what it is not, and although the video will be generally discussing conclusions, I will also touch on what a conclusion for an inquiry report might look like. So let's get started. First off, what is a conclusion? So, a conclusion is a place to firstly connect a paper's findings to our larger context, such as the wider conversation about an issue as it is presented in a course or in other published writing. So, essentially, a conclusion is a place where you can connect the findings of a paper or the issues discussed in a paper to a broader context, to a broader theme. It's the idea that you're bringing it into a larger context or a wider conversation. A conclusion is also a place to suggest the implications of your findings or the importance of the topic. So these two go sort of hand in hand. When you're connecting your paper's findings to a larger context, you're also implying why the paper is important or why the findings of the paper are important. Again, here you're explicitly suggesting that the implications or the findings of your paper are important and how they are important. Next, a conclusion is a place to ask questions or suggest ideas for further research. So, especially in an inquiry report, it is highly possible and even likely that although you will have a very narrow and focused question that you are inquiring about or exploring, that you will ultimately end up with even more questions than you started with. And some of those questions might lead to areas that can be further researched. So the conclusion is a place to bring up these ideas that you've come across that you think would be good for further research, or it's also a good place for you to ask those questions that have arisen throughout the process of your inquiry. A conclusion is also a place to revisit your main idea or research question with new insight. So it might be that throughout your inquiry, you shift a little bit in your perspective on your research question. So hopefully by the end of it, you've developed a new insight on your research question. And the conclusion is a place where you would be able to discuss this. Let's talk about some of the misconceptions about conclusions, because I think that these are very important and very easy mistakes to make. So we should discuss them so that you know what to look out for or what to avoid, rather. So, first of all, a conclusion is not a repeat of the introduction. A lot of times people think that a conclusion is simply restating or rephrasing or rewording your introduction. That is absolutely not true, right? Inherently in your introduction, you are introducing a topic. So it would not make sense for you to, at the end of your paper, also be introducing the topic or, you know, the ideas that will be discussed in your paper since you have already discussed them. Next, a conclusion is not a summary of the body. This is the whole purpose of your paper, right? Is to explain or argue a certain stance. There's no need for your conclusion to be a paragraph where you again recap everything that you've already thoroughly discussed in your body paragraphs. So, in very rare cases, you may have a summary as part of your conclusion, but it is never going to be just a summary. Your conclusion will never be a summary by itself. It may include a summary, but again, this is in the rare occasion that you have written a very long and lengthy paper and may need to refresh your reader or your audience on the key arguments throughout your paper. However, for a paper as short as your inquiry report, this is probably not something you need to do. And given the limited word count that you have, it's not recommendable that you summarize in your conclusion. Next, a conclusion is not a place to add new information. This is not the place where you want to further argue something that maybe you didn't fully articulate in the body paragraphs. So sometimes people make this mistake. They get to the end of their paper and then they realize that they've come up with a new argument or a new idea that is essential to the purpose of their paper, and they decide to throw it in their conclusion without really grounding it in any support. That is not something that you want to do. It's okay to, talk about new ideas that you came up with, particularly ideas that could lead to further research. Um, and, these new ideas are more kind of you reflecting on the process of your writing your paper and kind of the insights that you develop throughout that process. But it's not a place where you want to add new arguments or new information or new statistics or facts. All of that should be in your body. Finally, a conclusion is absolutely not a place to introduce your thesis statement. If you have an essay with a thesis statement, your thesis statement should be one of the first things that the reader knows. That should absolutely be in your introduction. This is the purpose, as we've discussed, of the thesis statement, is to allow your audience to understand what the purpose of your paper is. There's no reason why you should be introducing it at the end of your paper. By that point, it's much too late. And if I were your reader and I did not find a thesis statement in your introduction, I probably would not continue to read your paper. So, again, just avoid introducing your thesis statement in your conclusion. It belongs in your introduction. Some guiding questions that you might want to ask yourself when approaching the process of writing a conclusion are as following. First, how do the ideas in your paper connect to what you have discussed in class, so in this case at QRTA, or to what scholars have written in their research of your topic? So, how may the ideas in your paper connect to what scholars have already discussed in their literature regarding your topic? I think this is pretty straightforward, but it's always important to keep in mind, again, how your specific question, problem, or topic fits into a broader conversation or a larger context. You know, how do you connect to those around you, to the world around you, to your audience, to the field in which you are contributing your piece of writing to? Something else you want to ask yourself are, what new ideas have you added to the conversation? Again, with academic writing or academic literature, people are looking to contribute to a particular field, right? And they're usually looking to improve this field. So it's important to think about what you're adding with your piece of writing. This is also a space where you might want to think about what ideas you critique or you want to critique. These can be ideas that you come across or ideas that are already in the literature regarding your research topic. Another question to ask yourself is, what are the limitations of your data, methods, or results? This is very important, specifically in an inquiry report where you are looking for more, exploration than concrete answers. Part of this process is choosing a means or a way of collecting your data. It's about the process of creating a methodology for finding your data, and ultimately looking at the results and trying to figure out what those results actually mean. So it's also important to reflect on this process and ask yourself where things could have been improved, or given the methodology that you use, what were some of its limitations and things that need to be considered or accounted for. And finally, what are the consequences of the strongest idea that comes out of your paper, right? So if you have one central idea that you are presenting or that you are trying to persuade the audience or the reader about, what are the consequences of this idea? Articulate that a little bit. Particular to the inquiry report, these are some points that may help you in approaching writing a conclusion that is strong. First, restate the question or problem. Again, keep this short and concise. You don't have a lot of room, so by the end of it, people should know what your initial question or problem was. Um, but this is just a safeguard to kind of remind people, why they just read the body paragraphs they read and what question those paragraphs or those reasons are speaking to. You also want to outline the possible answers or causes. In addition, you want to highlight possible solutions where appropriate. You also want to raise any questions that have arisen from your inquiry. Again, we've already discussed this, but in an inquiry report, it is highly likely that you are going to come out with even more questions than you started with. And this is okay. This is completely acceptable. This is part of the process of the inquiry, which is an attempt to understand your topic within a broader context and a broader field, right? So the more you delve into something, the deeper you get into the research or the literature, it's normal that you're going to have more questions because you're going to understand the topic from many more points of view than you initially had. Therefore, you have more opportunities to ask questions or to challenge ideas. Next, what is the significance of the questions that have arisen from your research? Sorry, from your inquiry. So, again, this is tied to the last point, but it's here because I want to make sure that you're not only posing the questions that have arisen from your inquiry, but that you're really telling the reader why those questions are important. A lot of times, those questions are going to be important because they contribute to answering your question in one way or another, or because they're questions that will lead or should lead to further research. And while that's not always something that you yourself may be able to take up, it gives the idea to someone else in the field. Here's a question that I came across. Maybe this is something that you would like to explore and that you would like to try to find the answer to. Finally, how might you approach these new questions? So it's not only talking about the significance of the questions that have arisen from your inquiry, but it's also providing a possible idea about how these questions may be approached. Sometimes that will have to do with acknowledging the limitations of your methodology. If, for example, in your methodology, you are not able to, let's say, capture a large enough sample for your data, it's possible that one of the questions that has arisen in your research in part has arisen because you weren't able to collect enough data to really address this question. So perhaps suggesting a methodology that might allow someone to address this question is something that you would want to include. And that's pretty much it. These are some of the references that we used, and you guys